This week, we'll be discussing DUI by consent or DUI by proxy. A lot of people are not aware that you can get a DUI even if you are not the driver of the vehicle. So let's talk about how can you get the DUI even if you're not the driver.
Yeah, so you can be charged with a DUI by allowance. There's two elements the state's going to have to prove. First, they're going to have to prove that you have some ownership right in this vehicle, whether it's your car, whether you claim it, whether it's registered to you, and all the documentation comes back to you. And second, they're going to have to prove that you had knowledge that whoever was driving your vehicle, even if you were sober, was under the influence. And that could be that, that person appears drunk, they admit to drinking, or they say that you were with them all night. There's a variety of ways that the state can try to prove that you in fact had knowledge, and the penalties of it are very similar to a DUI, right?
Right. So for a DUI by allowing, there's a mandatory 48-hour jail time, $350 fine, along with a year-long suspension of your license. Now, the enhancement for DUI by allowing is also the exact same as a regular DUI, where if you have any prior DUI convictions on your record, it can then be charged as a DUI second, DUI third, fourth, fifth, whatever it may be according to your record.
When we talk about DUI by consent, Andrew mentioned they have to be able to prove that the person who was the passenger, who was the owner of the vehicle, registered owner, knew that the driver was impaired. So how can, as a passenger, that the person to your left is under the influence?
Yeah, so as it relates to the officer's observations, they're going to make their own observations for the driver of that vehicle. They're going to be looking for things like odors of alcohol, slurred speech, unsteadiness on your feet, things like that they can observe. And then they're going to come to you and ask you what you observed. We would always tell you to not make any statements when you're talking to officers in that circumstance. They're going to ask you things like, where were you guys coming from? Were you coming from a bar? Had you had anything to drink? Had the driver had anything to drink? Did you smell anything? Did you see him acting in any sort of way that would lead someone to believe that they were impaired?
Yeah, and when we look at under the influence, right, and how police officers prove DUI for the driver, the strongest piece of evidence is always going to be field sobriety tests, right? Because any observations of someone having an odor of alcohol or slurred speech potentially can be different. Individuals can differ on what they believe they saw. It's subjective. But field sobriety test is scientific evidence, so it is claimed based on some studies that are proven. And so a police officer is going to conduct these field sobriety tests. So our strongest piece of evidence as criminal defense attorneys, DUI attorneys, is to argue and get the officer to admit how important field sobriety tests are to prove that someone's impaired. And once we get the officer to admit how important those tests are and that it's the way that they prove that someone's under the influence, then we get to the fact that as a passenger, you're not trained in how to do those field sobriety tests. You don't know how to conduct them. So the strongest piece of evidence to prove DUI under the influence, as a passenger, you have no ability to do those tests. You don't know how to perform the HGN, the walk and turn, the one leg stand. Without it, we would argue that it is a subjective decision of whether the passenger knows that person is too impaired to operate that vehicle or not. So always remember, regardless, if you think you're too impaired as a passenger and you think that the driver might be too impaired, call an Uber, call a taxi. The safest way to avoid a DUI for your driver, the person to your left, as well as a DUI by consent for yourself, call an Uber.